And that makes the
now this is what a lot of people find puzzling.
There's an assumption that the Chinese political system is somehow wrong.
I don't think they give the whole picture of a certain thing.
It's very difficult to get a government reaction to things. It's very hard to find officials who are really willing to speak out.
The ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius once said, "Nothing is more precious than harmony." This idea has been commandeered by the Chinese government, but as Hu Jintao's harmonious society, the Confucian ideal, or an excuse to keep people from speaking out. Can you have a harmony if everyone is singing the same note? Press freedom in China is limited, and a lack of open discussion will result in stagnant or non-existent debate. However, are we in the free world really hearing the truth? The Western perception of China is an economic giant with an authoritarian regime. Is this outlook outdated, and why have we formed such stereotypes? Is China simply doing things its own way? Following the Jasmine Revolution throughout the Middle East, on the 20th of February 2011, the rumblings of revolution were felt in China. The Chinese government were accused of trying to quash protests by preventing any information of their own Jasmine Revolution reaching its people. Xi Jinping, a Chinese media student living in London, felt the full extent of the government's power when his Facebook account was closed down after posting an open invitation to the demonstrations.
I felt so surprised when I knew my page was blocked. I couldn't say the government's doing something wrong. They have their reasons to do so. Maybe they just want to manage or control the mass. Actually, some of my friends do know this so-called revolution, but they just prefer not to say anything. I won't post anything on the website again, because in current situation, most of us do not care about these issues. So next time, I'd better remain silent and shut up.
The most famous of the government's barriers to information is the so-called Great Firewall of China, acting as a blockade by censoring information deemed too sensitive for the public. In Hu Jintao's recent speech to the leaders of Chinese provinces, he said that the government would increase its control over the virtual society and perfect the channeling of online public opinion. One way this will be achieved is through the 50 Cent Party, who are a group of over 28,000 government employees who spend their time acting as regular internet users whilst covertly spreading pro-government rhetoric in chat rooms and online debates. The government's use of new media has added a whole new dimension to its ability to spread propaganda. In early 2010, Google withdrew from China mainland and set up their search engine in Hong Kong due to the government's strict censoring laws and accusations of hacking. The relationship between the Chinese government and Google has been a complicated one. Now Google is returning to the mainland with a combination of their .hk search service and their limited .cn service, hunting for profits in the biggest market in the world. However, the way in which the East and the West have reported this volatile business venture has been very different.
I would suspect to see further examples of this, and possibly, further American companies pulling out, or American companies putting resources in other friendlier countries. India, for example. Brazil is very exciting right now, so that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and at least they have laws, right? Eric, thank you so much for being with us.
Foreign companies in China have to comply with Chinese laws. Google has broken its written commitment made when entering the market. It is totally wrong to stop filtering its search services and blame China on the hacker attack. We are firmly against politicizing any business issues. There are distinct differences with the stories coming out of China and the stories being told in China. Many would say this is because the government are controlling the media. However, is it so black and white, or is the situation more complex than it seems?
For the British journalists, personally, they are always quite friendly to us and friendly to China. They like to know more about China. But because they don't know much, or say don't know enough about China, so they may have a different kind of perspective.
And I think that they can't see many of the complexities that you would see when you're closer up or even living in a country. you see that things are not quite so black and white and not quite so clear as you think they are when you see them from a tremendous distance.
The audiences, or say the readers here, they don't know China very well. If they just see this kind of bad stories from China, about China, they will say, oh, China is so awful.
There's a very outdated perception that China is a Stalinist-style regime, barely involved in capitalism, with a few factories that are making tons of goods. Whereas what I see is a very diverse and complex country that even when you live here is difficult to understand. And in those cases where it fits in with a view, yeah, they will tend to pick up on certain items and play them more strongly. And that can be negative about China, or negative about a company, or negative about a situation for the sake of the interest they think it will bring to their audience.
The pursuit of truth is the journalist's raison d'etre. The truth, however, comes in many forms. Without press freedom, people will only ever hear one version of it, and depending on whose version that is, will dictate what form the truth will take.
I think with any sensitive subject, the amount of coverage that takes place, particularly on an outlet like CCTV, would reflect the government's view on whether this should be considered important information for Chinese to know, rather than a reflection of what Chinese people want to know. That's the nature of state-controlled media.
But I don't think the British media should be just a watchdog for the Chinese government. They should not only be the watchdog for the Chinese government, they should also be a storyteller about China. So maybe a balanced way to tell the story about China.
Western perceptions of China are overwhelmingly negative. Day after day, we are bombarded with information telling us China is a repressive regime and we should be scared that the Eastern giant has awoken. Is this a constructive approach to journalism, or are the media simply reinforcing prejudices? In the West, we have always considered our civilization as the pinnacle of human achievement. Democracy and capitalism have become synonymous with development. But is this the only acceptable form of development? As director of the Chinese Media Center, Professor Hugo de Berg has conducted extensive research into the Western perceptions of China.
Compared to continental Europe, British people are much more positive about China than Italians, Spaniards, Germans and French, which is one good thing. They, on the whole, think that China is potentially an enemy and at the moment is a dangerous country. British journalists in China try to be fair, I think, on the whole, but they are also writing or reporting for an audience which has prejudices, and much from the material that they report and write and send back, what is selected back at home is often that which suits the prejudices of the audience. Media freedom in China is not something for us to address. It's something for the Chinese to address, and indeed they are addressing it.
There has been a wide range of improvements to press freedoms in China in recent years. However, when it comes to criticizing the political system, people in China are still being silenced. And news outlets must abide by very strict outlines, resulting in over 80% of their political coverage having a positive slant towards the regime.
About sensitive issue, you are not supposed to report whatever you like. Basically, if it is something related to the state, which has a lot of regulations and rules, of course, you have to follow that. You can't just say whatever you like. I do think sometimes we have responsibility in freedom of speech. I think you are a little bit loose on that over here, but in China, maybe we emphasize a little bit too much on the other side. We like to report all the good bits and put the others aside, pretending they are not happening. If you don't let people know the truth, they will think, well, you have something to hide. Why do you want to hide this kind of information? However, the Westerners' way of looking at China's issues maybe is from their own point of view, and which sometimes we feel they quite misunderstand China's issues or matters or affairs.
For many years, Western commentators, both academic and political, have regarded China in some ways as a failed state, because it failed to overthrow communism and has not succeeded in going down the Anglo-American democratic route. They've got to change their mindset. They've got to change their mindset, I think, or we have to change our mindset and see China in different ways, because the majority of Chinese people, I think, regardless of generation, social class, or economic situation, don't see it as a priority for China to go down that Anglo-American democratic route. They believe that their country is succeeding because it has its own model, which is a model that other countries may follow, and which is different to the Anglo-American model, and they have no intention of becoming like Westerners.
History has taught us that imposing ideals onto other societies does not equate to global development, and civilizations will always walk their own path. China is walking hers, and whether it is right or wrong is neither our decision to make nor a judgment one can ever be sure of.